What's up, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Toledo Rockets podcast. We're just a few days away now from the Boca Raton Bowl between Toledo and Liberty, and the game is going to be December 20th at 7:30 p.m. on ESPN. So now that we're getting closer to it, let's take a deeper look at this game and some of the matchups. First of all, to get started, both teams had some rough stretches towards the end of the season. Toledo lost 3 straight conference games at the end after they had already clinched to go to the MAC championship game. Hey, everybody. Sorry for the interruption, but as you can hear, probably heard there, I had threes on the brain. I meant to say that Liberty had 3 losses, but Toledo had 2 losses in a row before beating Ohio. So I just wanted to correct that here really quick by butting in, and then you can get back to the show. So apologize for that. Thanks. And then they got back on the rebound, at least, with a 17-7 victory over Ohio University in the MAC championship game. For Liberty, they lost their last 3 regular season games, and they lost to UConn 36-33. UConn's a much improved team this year. They're going to a bowl game. You can see that loss. Then they lost to Virginia Tech 23-22, and Virginia Tech really had a rough year this year. So that's a surprising loss. This is a Liberty team. They were 8-1. And then they lost to UConn and then Virginia Tech. And now they go into the last game of the regular season and they lose to New Mexico State to fall to 8-4. And the game against New Mexico State, they lost 49-14. New Mexico State had to win their last 2 games to get bowl eligible at 6-6. And there's a lot of talk that, it may not have been official yet, but there were rumors that Hugh Freeze was going to leave Liberty to go to Auburn. And I'm sure that affected the team a lot in this game, but it's still a pretty big head scratcher that you lose that badly. I get it, the players, they buy into a system, they buy into a coach, and you're hearing that he's going to be leaving. That can really break a game for you, and that's what happened. But they really lost 3 straight games. UConn, Virginia Tech, New Mexico State. Nobody knew that Hugh Freeze was going to be leaving for Auburn when they lost those games to UConn and Virginia Tech. So definitely something to take a look at as they come out in the Boca Raton Bowl against Toledo to see how they play. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at Liberty. Like I said, Hugh Freeze is leaving. He's going to Auburn in the SEC. He had been the head coach at Liberty for the last 4 seasons, led them to a bowl game in each of the last 3 seasons that they were in FBS. And then, of course, this season, he won't be coaching the bowl game, but, this is the 4th season. So they are new in FBS, just 4 seasons, but they are going to a bowl game in each of their first 4 seasons. So that is a pretty big accomplishment right there. Liberty is hiring Jamie Chadwell to take over their program, and he was the head coach at Coastal Carolina for the past 4 years. 2020, he led Coastal Carolina. They had a great year, and he was the National Coach of the Year, as a matter of fact, in 2020. So he's going to come in, he's going to take over the program, but he will not be coaching in the bowl game. Co-defensive coordinator Josh Aldridge will coach the Flames in the bowl game against Toledo, and he's been with the program since 2018. So now that we've looked at the coaching side of things, let's look at the defense a little bit, but I want to start it with this. We all know defensive back Quinyon Mitchell for Toledo has been a great player this year, and I've talked before about it. He was named to the Walter Camp All-America second team. But, Liberty has their own Walter Camp second team All-American, and that is defensive end Darrell Johnson. He's a 6'3", 240-pound senior, and he led the nation in tackles for loss this season. Um, as a whole, Liberty gave up 24.9 points per game and 345.3 yards per game. But a guy like Johnson playing on the defensive line, defensive end, he's a player that Toledo's really going to have to keep an eye on when they're out on offense and Liberty's on defense. He's not necessarily the biggest guy, 6'3", good size there, but 240 pounds. He's not your big 280, 290-pound defensive tackle. He's defensive end. He's quick. He's got good moves, and he gets into the backfield really quickly. That's why he led the nation in tackles for loss, to be honest. And, we've talked about it before. Toledo's offensive line is struggling a little bit. They get called for a lot of penalties. There's a lot of tackles for loss. Quarterbacks are, whether it is Finn or Gleason, they're usually having to run out of the pocket when they go back to pass because of the pressure on them. And this is going to be interesting to see. This is going to be a very interesting matchup. The Toledo offensive line with the extra time for the bowl game to practice. Can they fix some of the issues, some of the penalties that they've been getting called for, and be able to stop Johnson? He's a dynamic player on the defensive line for Liberty, and I would suspect that there will be some double teams against him and so forth. I'm sure when the Rockets go back to pass and they have a running back in the backfield to pick up a blitz, he's also going to be thinking about Johnson and where he is and if he's coming in. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup. I think another matchup to look at will offensively for Liberty, they have a sophomore wide receiver, Demario Douglas. He has led the team in receptions for each of the last 2 years. And I list him as a sophomore. They list him as a sophomore on the roster. Technically, he would be considered a junior, but, there's the 2020 COVID year that you don't have to count the eligibility towards for that year. So he's a sophomore, but you could also consider him a junior. In 2021, he led the team with 701 yards receiving. He had 52 receptions. This year, he had 73 receptions for 977 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he led the team with the 73 receptions. I think second on the team was below 40. It was like 37 or 38, something to that effect. So he's definitely their go-to receiver. I've watched him on film from the last 2 years, and I can tell you Douglas is quick. He's a shifty receiver, and he can make defenders miss. And that's one of the big things with him. He can just make people miss. He's quick. They utilize him all over the field. They'll throw short passes to him. They'll throw the deep ball to him. And he's even run the ball a few times, end around, reverses, that kind of thing. So he's definitely a dynamic player that Toledo's going to have to watch. And I fully expect sophomore defensive back Quinyon Mitchell will be matched up against him throughout the game. He's a shutdown corner for Toledo. He's really the best opportunity for Toledo to shut him down. And that's what you want to do. He is a big part of Liberty's offense. And if you can shut him down, you have a good chance of shutting down the Liberty offense. He's led the team in all-purpose yards. Douglas. He's typically gets about 6, 7, 8 catches a game for around 80 to 100 yards or so. He did have like 200 yards against UConn. I think that those were all-purpose yards, 220 yards. And some of that was running, was on a running play and stuff like that, punt returns and so forth. But he's the guy. You've got to shut him down to shut down the Liberty offense. And I think that Quinyon Mitchell is going to be matched up against him quite a bit, and wouldn't be surprised if Toledo even looks to double team him at times, because if you can stop him, you should have a good chance of stopping their offense. So before we go any further, if you like this video and you like the content that we bring out, Um, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and um, talk about anything in the comments that you want to talk about. Bring up any topics that you want to hear us talk about in the future, and we can look at doing that for a future episode. All right. So, I talked a bit about Douglas as their dynamic player, wide receiver, punt returns, kick returns, but who's going to get the ball to him? That's really the big question mark for Liberty. They have three different quarterbacks that played in their last game against New Mexico State. First of all, is Charlie Brewer. He's a senior, and you probably remember that name. He played quarterback for Liberty a few years ago, and he also played at Utah last year. He started the game against New Mexico State. He also started the first game of the season. Those were his only two starts. But in the game against New Mexico State, he was 5 of 9 passing for 34 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Jonathan Bennett also came into the game. He was 8 of 13 passing for 72 yards. And Bennett has really played the most throughout the season, played in the most games, and really had thrown the ball the most and so forth. And then you got Caden Salter. And Salter was 12 of 17 for 101 yards and a touchdown, playing mostly in the second half of this game. My gut tells me that Salter's probably going to get the majority of the playing time against Toledo. As the season has gone on here, like the last 4 or 5 games, he's gotten more playing time. And I think he's brings a little bit more to the table for Liberty at quarterback. So I think we're going to see him, even if he doesn't start, I think we're going to see him get the majority of the playing time in the bowl game. So when the Rockets are on offense, they have the ball, you can expect a lot more balanced in the passing attack. Doesn't matter if it's Finn or it's Gleason at quarterback, you're going to see a lot of different receivers out there catching the ball. 5 different receivers have caught 20 or more passes this year for Toledo. 7 different players are in double digits for receptions. And, it really starts with sophomore Jerwan Newton. He leads the way with 48 receptions, 788 yards receiving, and 9 touchdowns. He caught multiple TD passes in 2 games this year. And he really stepped up and is definitely improving. Just a sophomore. Can't wait to see him play next year. But again, it's a balanced receiving core for Toledo. Junior Devin Maddox and sophomore Demir Blankumsey are right behind him with 38 and 37 receptions each for the season. Jamal Turner, he's a senior at tight end. He's played great out of the tight end position. He has 26 receptions for 325 yards and 8 touchdowns this season. And his 8 touchdowns are second only to Newton's 9. So he has just had a great year this year for Toledo. And then there's 3 running backs, all sophomores, that have factored into the passing game for Toledo. And that would be Penny Boone, Micah Kelly, and Jaquez Stewart. 3 of them have combined for 31 total receptions this year. And, they've all done a great job out of the backfield catching passes. They can run the ball, of course, as running backs, and then they can catch the ball. That reminds you a lot of how Bryant Koback was, where he wasn't just a running back, but he could catch passes for you out of the backfield. And all 3 of them have done a great job with that throughout the season. So in all, when you look at it, there are 9 different players with at least 9 receptions this season for Toledo. So for, when you look at Liberty, they really can't just key on like 1 or 2 players, right? They've got to worry about the whole team, because if you try and key on Newton, for instance, then Turner's going to hurt you over the middle. Devin Maddox has got speed. He will hurt you, and so on, right? So as long as the offensive line gives the quarterback enough time to throw the ball, then Toledo can be very dangerous on offense. And as long as the running game is working as well, that opens the passing game up even more. So who in the secondary for Liberty will try to stop this passing attack? I think they're going to rely on junior Robert Rahimi, sophomore Kobe Singleton, and junior Chris Meganson. Rahimi leads the team with 5 interceptions, and he's also had 50 tackles this year. He started all 12 games out of the safety position. Singleton and Meganson have led the team with 6 pass breakups each. Singleton started 10 of 12 games at cornerback, but he did play in all 12 games. He just didn't start 2 of them. And Meganson started all 12 games at cornerback. Then Javon Scruggs is a senior who started all 11 games at the rover position, and I really expect him to have an impact too, not just in the pass game, but also in rush defense, trying to stop the run. And then there's another corner, a defensive back. He's a backup, Dejon Anthony. I bring him up because even though he doesn't start, he does play well. He has 2 interceptions. He had 4 pass breakups for the season, and he should see a fair amount of playing time in the secondary for Liberty in this game. So when you look at it, I think that's going to be a key matchup, right? Is that secondary trying to stop the Toledo receivers, right? And again, we're not just talking about wide receivers here. We're talking about tight end, 3 running backs. Anytime you have any of those running backs in the game, they can all catch passes out of the backfield. And a key, I think, is really going to be how well the offensive line plays for Toledo. I've talked a lot about it lately, right? I haven't been a fan of the offensive line in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of penalties, and the penalties have dropped a little bit from last year, and really the last couple of years, but they're happening at key times, right? And on the offensive line, that's what you see a lot of. The team is inside their own 20-yard line to start a drive, and they get called for holding or a false start right away. And now they're at like the 10-yard line, and it's 1st and 15, 1st and 20. And you're going to be more conservative and run the ball. And the defense is expecting that as well. And now it's 2nd and 18 or something, right? So those are key times that hurt. And just looking at penalties in general, not just the offensive line, the defense has had that happen too, where not necessarily a lot of penalties called on Toledo, but it's at key times. There's been a lot of times it's been 3rd down and Toledo has stopped the other team and it would be 4th down, but they were called for a roughing the passer or face mask, or defensive holding or something like that, and it gave the other team a 1st down. So penalties can be a key in this game as well. Both teams do get called for a similar amount of penalties. We're talking about 6, 7, 8 penalties a game, typically around 80 to 85 yards per game. So, they're not, neither one of them are low in penalties. They do have a good amount of penalties, not a high amount like, what Toledo had before, like going last year, the year before, they had a lot more penalties. You look at Alabama this year, it seems like they were getting called for penalties almost every play. So it's not that level, but it's a high enough level, and it's at crucial times in the game that it really hurts. And that is going to be a key. Which team between Toledo and Liberty can limit the penalties and limit them at crucial times in the game? So definitely penalties are going to be a key in this game. Special teams can be a key. And, Demario Douglas, the wide receiver for Liberty, he returns punts and kicks. And Toledo has to have good punt coverage against him because he's a dynamic player. He's shifty and he can break loose. So that's going to be a key. So special teams definitely will come into play. And then the matchups I talked about, looking at Johnson on the defensive line for Liberty. He led the nation, like I said, he led the nation in tackles for loss. You have to try and minimize him. Don't let him take over the game defensively. And then going back to Demario Douglas, shut him down. Double team him at times, keep Quinyon Mitchell on him as much as possible and try and shut him down. And if you shut him down, I think that Liberty will struggle on offense. and that's going to be another key to the game. So those are really my keys going into the game. And if Toledo can capitalize on at least a few of those, and I'm going to say shutting down Douglas, the offensive line doing a better job with the penalties, limiting the penalties, defense not getting called for penalties in key plays on third downs. And then again, looking at neutralizing Johnson on the defensive line for Liberty. If Toledo can do those things, they should get a nice victory in the Boca Raton Bowl against Liberty. So let me know what you think in the comments. And we'll probably talk about this game a little more leading up to it. We still have a few days yet before the game. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.